Record. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Sabina. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So thank you so much. I think we can start now. Yeah, great to see you all joining this session this afternoon here in Nairobi. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Michelle Mbochwawu. I currently serve as the Deputy Director for Program at the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development. This is a award. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on proposal funding and scientific publishing, which I really hope will be a very informative session with many questions to our panelists who have graciously accepted our invitation to share their experience from both a donor and editor's perspective. I really would like to acknowledge Dr. Sandra Gagnon, Dr. Ningisi Gezaye, Prof. Patrick Jobe, Prof. Saha Desage, and Prof. Peter Pujambo, who are joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. This webinar is divided in two sections. I will be moderating the first section on perspective for fundraising for researchers, research institutions, and especially talking about the issues of how we make our proposal attractive to the donors. The second session will be on scientific publishing, and this will be moderated by Prof. Sheila Okot, who will also introduce the panelists. We invite you to type your question on the chat, and we'll be responding just during the question and answer session. If you could please specify to whom your question is addressed, that would be also good, so that we can direct the question directly to the panelists. And with no further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Sandra Gagnon. Sandra is joining us from Ottawa in Canada. Sandra is a senior program officer at the International Development Research Center, IDRC, and she's based in Ottawa, Canada, as I just mentioned. She is also a researcher, and I believe both perspectives will be very key as she walks us through the presentation that she's prepared today. Sandra, welcome to this webinar. We really want to hear your perspective about what makes an effective or attractive proposal to the donors. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
I will share my screen. And you tell me if you can see the presentation. Okay.
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. So, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to first thank you, Michelle, and our team for inviting me today. I'm very, very glad to be with you all, to meet you virtually, and to take part of this important work. As Michelle mentioned, I'm talking from Ottawa. I'm based in Ottawa, which is an unceded land from the Algonquin people in North America. So as Michelle said, I'm here representing the International Development Research Center, IDRC, and I would first like to just give you a brief overview of IDRC for those of you who might not be very familiar with the institution. Then I will talk a little bit more about the program climate resilient food system, which I belong to give you a little bit more idea of what's our priorities in terms of funding. Then I will talk about how we fund project with a description briefly about of the application and review process, whether it is for a call for proposal or for unsolicited proposals. Then I will talk about the selection criteria we have with a few tips and examples. And I will conclude with a few elements on the evolution of trend we see at IDRC in the field of funding for development. So, okay. So IDRC is a key part of Canada Canada's foreign policy. The center initiates, supports, and conducts research on the problem of low and middle income countries to foster their development and self-reliance. It was created in 1970 as a Canadian Crown corporation. We support practical research that improves the lives and livelihoods across the developing world, and this work addresses pressing development challenges, build local research skills, and reduce dependence on aid. In brief, our strategic objectives are to invest in high-quality research and innovation in order to build leaders in the South for today and for tomorrow. It's also to share knowledge for greater assimilation and use, mobilize alliance to generate greater impact. Since IDRC is part of Governments of Canada Foreign Affairs family, the initiative and research project that we fund also helps to advance Canada's international development priorities. For example, it's the case of gender and feminine condition, but it's also the case for the commitment of the global community, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, and key among these priorities are climate change and food security. And IDRC has had a long history of support for research and fellowships in that field, starting in 2006 for climate change and from 2009 in agriculture and food security. This had a strong focus in Africa in general, but more recently, in particular in West Africa. Since the end of 2020, IDRC adopted a new strategy for the next 10 years. With this new strategy, we have also a new structure, which is more flexible in order to be able to tackle in a better way complex problems and challenges. And we have more time to do it because we used to have a term of 5 years rather than 10 years. We also passed from 11 programs to 5. So this way, we hope we will be able to work in a more integrated way, leaving behind what we call the silos. So we now have 5 divisions, one on sustainable inclusive economies, one on global health, one on education and science, one on democratic and inclusive governance, one on climate resilient food system, which is the division I belong to, as I mentioned, which build on 10 years of research in climate change and food security. It also builds on the fact that in spite of the advances that we see in the recent decades, all the knowledge, all the innovation that have been generated and that do exist already, the number of people suffering from hunger increase. Close to 1 every 3 people worldwide did not have access to adequate food in 2020. Of course, the COVID had a lot to do with that, but still it's a trend that we see among the years. In 2020, close to 12% of the people globally was severely food insecure. And also we see that the triple burden of malnutrition, which is the obesity, malnutrition, and micronutrient deficiency, affects millions of people, and this is also increasing. Many challenges are very alarming, such as climate change, emergence and spread of zoonotic disease, antimicrobial resistance, endemic livestock disease. As you know, conflict and inequality are also increasingly important and affect food and nutrition security and poverty. So a paradigm shift was required in the field of climate resilient agriculture and food system in order to have the food system to contribute to nutrition, equity, and climate change so that all people benefit from nutritious and healthy food, we can increase the resilience of productive system and value chains and mitigate in a better way climate change, and so that women are empowered and there is an increase in youth inclusion. This is the goal and the reason why we created, in the context of our restructuration, this new program on climate resilient food system to support the transition toward more resilient, more equitable, and more healthy food system. The program focuses on climate change hotspot. It sees the usefulness of food system as an entry point to address and understand the impact of climate change, of pandemics, of social political conflict on the life of the local population. It uses the food system's perspectives to understand these issues both globally and locally. It supports smallholders, farmers, vulnerable groups, putting women and gender at the center of the program and working with indigenous population. The activities that we are currently developing and supporting aim at understanding the trade-offs between the different models in food systems, depending on which objectives it is that we want to achieve in particular. For instance, working with varieties that are more productive or resilient to drought, or supporting agroforestry that improves water management, or studying circular economy that will reduce emissions due to transport, or supporting cooperatives of women producers to move to agroecology, therefore reducing their exposures to agrochemicals and that of their families. That way, we hope to have an impact on various SDGs, in particular SDG 2 on zero hunger, SDG 3 on health and well-being, 5 on gender equality, 12 on responsible consumption and production, and 13 on climate action. Before I get into what we will look specifically in a proposal, I want to just briefly explain the life cycle of project management at IDRC so that you understand better what this enters. So the first step is the selection and the funding of project. So for the first step, we have three main financing modalities. We have unsolicited proposals that we can receive from different research institutions at any moment of the year. We have strategic project that we will develop according to our own strategic objective and that we will develop with a specific partner. And we have open calls. So once the projects are selected, and I will explain just after how we do that, it is jointly developed between the research team and with the support of IDRC. Then during the step of the implementation of the project is going on, the activities are being implemented, the team apply its monitoring and evaluation framework, which is a set of indicators and milestones to achieve. They will do that through an iterative process, reporting to IDRC in the process. They train and mentor their student, the team members, the stakeholders on specific issues, depending on the objective of the project. And finally, we have the last step, which is the one of the final reporting, publication of articles and other publication, and the synthesis, either at the level of the cohort or at the level of the program, depending where we are in our internal cycle. I have here the example of the synthesis for the Canadian International Food Security Research Fund that we used to call CIFSERV. Maybe some of you know this program. It was a 10-year partnership between IDRC and Global Affairs Canada that contributed unique innovation, ideas, and solutions to improve food and nutritional security, and that funded 39 projects that involved 20 Canadian and 40 Southern organizations. So now if we look at into more details at the selection process let's start with an unsolicited proposal. So the process will start when we receive a research idea from one or more organizations that will work together, and they can send this to us at any time of the year. The idea will be reviewed within our program. Typically, it will involve minimum two or three program officers that will review it. This comes as after a first screening from the program to see whether it meets the basic criteria. Then if the idea is sound and meet our IDRC and CRFS criteria, we will invite the team to submit a full proposal. If the proposal is strong, meets the criteria, and we have still some money left in our budget, then the proposal is accepted. There will be often back and forth and several communication and versions before that happens. And also sometimes the proposal will be conditionally accepted, and the research team may be required to make some revision in the early stage of the project. For example, to strengthen gender, this often happens, or also, for example, to strengthen the environmental sustainability elements. The approval process on the side of IDRC will start with the preparation of an internal document, the project approval document, what we call the PAD. And this will consider different elements, and this document will document how the project will contribute to IDRC's objective. So we will, for example, look at application of lessons learned from previous projects that were funded for this specific team and for this specific group. So how were the challenges or the risk that emerged dealt with in the past? What are the development priorities or the local context to which the project is responding? Does it really address them in an adequate way? Does it have good chance to be successful in doing that? How is the methodology? Is it sound? Is it innovative? How is the gender issue addressed within the methodology and throughout the project? What are the expected results? What are the outcomes, the outputs? How will the project disseminate the result, and how it will link to policy, and how are the potential sensitivities are managed. This document will also look at the ethical consideration, institution and personnel. Does the team has the capacity to manage such a project? What about the qualification of the team members? Are there women involved? And also the project will address the risk associated to the project, mainly related to political and social aspects. If we now look at the selection process in the context of a call for proposal, it will generally involve 2 steps, and it will involve both IDRC reviewers and external reviewers. It starts with the reception of application, followed by a pre-selection by IDRC to make sure the pre-selected project meet the basic criteria of the specific call. Then there will be a review and pre-selection by a scientific committee, which will be composed of IDRC program officers and external reviewers, which are experts in the field and in the geographic area where we want this initiative to be developed. Successful candidates will be invited to develop complete proposals. Then we receive these proposals. We go again through a review process by the scientific advisory committee, which will involve again external reviewers. And then the final decision will be made by a governance committee, which is composed of selected experts in the field and representative from the management or from the donors organization. At this stage, there are often some improvements that are requested to the research team that were highlighted by the scientific committee. And once IDRC has a satisfactory proposal, it can proceed to contracting and implementation of the project. I mentioned just at the beginning that there's generally 2 steps involved in calls, but sometimes we may opt for just 1-step process. This is where we will request the presentation of a full proposal as the only step without going through the concept note step. This happens when we are particularly pressed by time, for instance, in the case of pandemics, like the case of COVID, where we hope that the result produced will be able to inform policy decision and measure in time to have an impact. A 2-step process is much more time consuming, but on the other hand, it's more time consuming for the teams to prepare a full proposal as an entry point. And we will try to avoid having a one-step process if we know that many institutions will respond to our call, just to make sure that nobody works unnecessarily doing extra work. So what are we looking for in this proposal? Well, generally, we will look at, when we receive a proposal, we will pay special attention to the justification. So why is this important? Then we'll see if it clearly addresses local priorities from the community level, national level, or regional level. Are the objectives clear? And the research question, are they sound? What about the methodology? Is it robust enough? How is the gender treatment in the proposal? Are there specific gender objectives and activities? And importantly, pardon, are there any budget lines related to these gender activities? Is gender properly integrated throughout the proposal, or is just added at the end of sentence just to make it look like it's addressed, right? Is the project too broad, or is it feasible? Is the knowledge transferred and use well treated in the proposal? Is it well explained? How will it take place? Is there a clear intention and capacity to reach out not only to the scientific community, but also to inform policy and the local practice? What are the expected results? Are they ambitious enough? What is the experience of the team? Is it transdisciplinary? Not only in terms of hard science, but also social science. For instance, having a multidisciplinary team with agronomists, biologists, hydrologists, etc. is fine, but we also need social science, scientists. And in fact, a good balance of both types is often key in the project that we found. That's what's experience have teach us since the past recent years. What about the multi-stakeholders participation in the project? Is the project bottom up or bottom down, top down? Does it value local knowledge? When you develop or write a concept note or an intention letter, it's important to show us and highlight what is the potential of the research. At the stage of the concept note, that's the most important. So be sure that the concept note is written in a clear and concise style to show that you are innovative and why this particular project is important or exciting, to show that you know what's already been done on the subject without entering in a full literature review at this stage. Show that you know how to do it, but don't take too much time to do a complete methodology at this stage, only the general terms. Insist on what difference your research will make. Now for the research proposal. What's the most important is to show that the proposal is robust. Show that your project is innovative, why it's important or exciting again. Show links to local and national policies and priorities. Show that you know what has already been done through a good literature review. Ensure your research question and objectives are clear and that your methodology is robust and detailed. You have to show exactly how you will be implementing your methodology. Highlight how you will integrate gender throughout the project, how the project is feasible. Describe the team's experience and insist on multidisciplinary aspects. Describe how the project is participatory, how you see stakeholders' engagement for greater buy-in and potential impact that will be long-lasting. Describe your knowledge translation framework and how the result will be used and what are the indicators of success. And finally, you have to present us with a clear and feasible budget with explanatory notes that will help us understand the full project. I just want to give you an example of the criteria that we used in the case of a previous call for proposal. It was a case of Cultivate Africa's Future, what we used to call CulTF. This was a call for concept note that was published in January 2018, and we were the funders along with Australian Centre for International Agriculture Research, ACIAR. So this is not for you to go through all of that very carefully, but just to give you a brief overview of how the criteria are constructed from our side. So you will see that there are 5 big divisions in which you will find all the elements that I've been presenting so far. So for instance, we will look at the research relevance for food security challenges in this particular area. We will look at the quality of the proposal, like insisting on the methodology. We will look at how it aligns with the priority and objective of the particular initiative. We will look also at environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And you have everything detailed there. And most of the time you have access to the information when there is a call for proposal that is published. And I also want to raise your attention to the percentage that we will attribute to each of these categories, which is not the same. So this also helps you when you build your proposal to make sure that those where the percentage is higher, that you really insist on that and you make sure that this is really well covered and well written in your proposal. And to conclude, I would just like to give you a few elements on how we see the evaluation of all of this within IDRC, and it also reflects what is observed in other partners donor. So we see that there is a move from mostly funding unsolicited proposal that we used to do much more in the past, to using more and more call for proposal to select our project. And this is to reflect our new priorities. And so we will try to focus more on call for proposal. And it's also to increase transparency on how we will select our partners and the proposal, to make sure that there is always room for new partners to come to work with IDRC. We also see a change from projects that were aiming at producing knowledge, like pure, more academic project, to projects that demonstrate development impact. And in fact, nowadays, IDRC don't fund a project that don't have this aspect of having an impact in the field. We see a change from smaller projects to larger ones that will involve sometimes several countries, consortium of research institutions, networks. So we see that more and more. And we observe also that monitoring and evaluation is systematized in every project. This is something that we always see now. With that, I would just like to thank you all for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. I'm sure there are already many questions there about the processes that you've just presented, about the key priority research area, but also you talked also about development areas that IDRC covers. The link to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is another key and important element, especially now that we are in all this move around food systems, and how we ensure that the research that we do, it's actually connected with the realities on the ground. The processes moving from unsolicited proposals to more call for proposal. This we have also seen. I believe that the door is not completely closed for the unsolicited proposal. There is still opportunity, in particular when the proposal is very innovative, and also the need to kind of push for more consortium rather than small projects being funded by IDRC. I think all this because we want to see greater impact, as Sandra mentioned as she was closing her remark on this. We have the presentation. I'm sure that with Sandra's permission, we can share with whoever is interested in this, just to make sure that you can have the information in an app, just very condensed in this slide, and use it as you will be trying to respond to the calls for proposal in the coming weeks or years. So thank you so much, Sandra. And of course, we keep you there as we continue to get questions coming, and inviting now Dr. Ningitse Gezaye. Ningitse, you are the Director of International Foundation for Science, IFS, in Stockholm. So you're joining us from there. You have broad experience in the creation of international multi-stakeholder networks. And we see also this as something that has kind of promoted the dialogue and building of effective work partnerships. So we are very happy to have you here, because we are sure that you can, in that process of building effective partnership, tell us more about how we then get to find the right funders, and how do we do to ensure that we can actually be able to select grant opportunities that are favorable to us as researchers. Welcome, Ningitse, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michelle, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all the participants. Very happy to be here and to contribute the views of the International Foundation for Science on the issue on finding the right funders and trying to answer the question, are you deliberate and selective about which grant opportunity you pursue and which you forgo? I'm going to look at it from a perspective of the grant seeker, especially you early career researchers, when you look at different opportunities for funding. What I'd like to say is that as a grant seeker, your objective should be to organize your time and to ensure that you are only working on submissions that have some realistic shot of success. You have to make sure that the funder is worth your time. As early career scientists, you need time to prepare proposals, you need time to have a competitive proposal, and you should not lose your time in sending proposals to any organization, but you have to make sure that that organization that you target, that you would like to send your proposal, is the right organization for what you want to do. So you want to write an application that is going to get funded, and not to send or write an application for just testing whether you will get a grant or you will not get a grant. And I'm talking from experience here, that IFS gets a number of applications which are not really within the remit of what IFS can support, but there are any applications that we receive from people that they don't look at our website, they don't look at what is the type of funding that IFS gives us, and they spend some time and maybe weeks and months to prepare a proposal, which at the end, when we get it, it's not going to be funded. So when looking for funding, it can be really tempting to cast your net as wide as possible in an attempt to catch the most opportunities. Yes, realistically, you're better off focusing your efforts on those opportunities where you are most likely to succeed. For example, if you are an early career researcher, there is really little benefit in applying for grants that require a more experienced researchers. Different organizations, they focus on different research disciplines. We have heard from Sandra about Idrc. What is Idrc looking for? What type of proposals? Which subject matters do they look for? And before really applying for any donor or a grant organization, you have to see what is it that we will get if I apply for this? Are my interests related to the interest of the funder? And as you can see from the presentation of Sandra, she went all in detail to see that there are many things that you have to look before applying. Many organizations, they have got this information on their website, or there are application regulations. And from experience, we see that people have the tendency not to read in detail, and they spend a lot of time in applying for organization, which at the end of the day, they don't succeed. So my message here is that there are first different types of grant funders. They can be government organizations, they can be private sector, and they can be foundations. So it's extremely important that you put the bulk of your energy into the most winning strategies and opportunities that match your interest. Think about your project and field of expertise. What is your work broader sphere of influence? Get to know what broader terms that attach to timely research in your field. For example, is it food systems? Is it food security? Is agricultural productivity? Do you work on the water sector and interested on integrated water resource management? So which are these organizations that give funding for my project and that I can successfully get a grant from these organizations? Once you understand your objective and your priority, you are ready then to begin identifying funders that might be a good fit for you. I have some few key points to remember, for you to remember, that there are no shortcuts to finding the right funding source. Nothing can replace a thorough research to look where are these organizations that are interested in my research proposal. Try to look beyond the obvious funders to find a wider group of prospects. Many researchers are aware maybe of the major funding organizations, but there are many other small foundations, there are charities, there are organizations that are offering more funding. Elsevier's Finding Institutional Platform, it lists about 5,500 organizations. While not all of those organizations, they fund research in every discipline, this demonstrates or shows to us that there are a lot more funders out there beyond maybe the names that everyone is familiar with. Keep in mind that funders have missions and they have goals that they want to achieve. And they will not support your project if what you are proposing does not fall in their mission and goals. Once you have identified your funder, showing a funder how you are the best candidate to fulfill both your own goals and the goals also of the donor organization that gives you funding is really a smarter grant winning strategy. Be aware that funding organizations, they can change interest, they can change areas of application processes. Try to always get the most up-to-date information of the organization that you want to apply. I can tell you from IFS, for example, we have now a new strategy, which we started implementing it in 2020 and full-fledged in 2021, 2030. And in this new strategy, we have changed a lot of eligibility criteria. We have changed the work of the grant size. We have changed who is eligible. And every year we also indicate which countries can apply to IFS following certain criteria. So if you don't look all the time, if you're not update your knowledge about the organizations, you might end up in writing a proposal that is not up to date, and that you spend a lot of time, but at the same time, then you don't get the grant at the end. IFS or any other grant maker organization, we receive tons of requests for funding. Don't waste your time and don't waste the time of the funders in a way with requests that they don't align with their interest and your interest. As an example, in 2020, IFS has got around 3,000 applications. I'm telling you about 3,000 applications. And as a funding organization, we have to go through all these proposals, and then we have to sift out a number of proposals that they are completely out of our remit. What a loss of time for IFS to do all that work, and above all for you that have spent a lot of time to prepare a proposal, and then at the end to receive a message that your proposal is out of our mandate. These are homeworks that you as early career researchers have to do at the beginning, and not send a proposal and get this answer because you have been awaiting that maybe you'll get a grant. My key message actually is try to be strategic. Your task is really to identify all potential funders whose interest aligns with your priorities and with your proposal or with your project plans. Sometimes you will focus research on grant makers for a specific part of your research, for example. That's fine. Are you looking, for example, for only travel money or to visit colleges? Or are you looking for money for your field work? Is your project a multi-year project? Do you want to do some proof or concept work, etc., etc.? These are things that it has to be very clear in your objectives on what you want to do so that you can get the right funder. These are really straightforward elements to clarify for yourself before applying, and it will win now the funding opportunity nicely. If you are going to get a full support for your project, that will be most productive over time. It's best to explore who can fund your whole project and to find those that are the best fit for your project. Don't approach this task in a kind of a hit or miss manner. Don't do it randomly and don't do it haphazardly. There are a lot of internet sites that provide lists of foundations and announcements of upcoming foundation or government funding opportunities. And you might run across some promising opportunities there. Try to look at the tools for finding research funding opportunities. But browsing free sites and responding to listserv announcements puts you in a disorganized, reactive position that really won't produce the best result. Learn about the serious research tools available, then use them in a well-considered, strategic way to find appropriate funders. Again, using a funding search tool can help. Funding institutional and other tools will let you filter by requirement. For example, some grants are targeted specifically to only women, or to minorities, or only to early career researchers, or people based in a particular country or only a particular region. Just as when you are looking, for example, for something very specific on Google or Science Direct, it helps to narrow your search rather than have to wade through tens of thousands of results looking for what you need. You might want to start putting together your own funding calendar. It can be a calendar with the regular deadlines for the schemes you want to aim for. This means that you'll keep track of when you need to ramp up the grant writing and the deadlines you will have to observe. Many calls have short opening times. For example, the FS has got a window of 2 months opening time. A lot of other funders, they have got only a once between the grant being open for submission and the final deadline. So unless you have a project ready to roll off the blocks, it can be difficult to pull it together well in that time. So my advice, or the advice of many organizations like us, is that grant preparation and writing should be treated as a year-round task. Because if you are not aware of all what's happening, if you are not clear on your time plan on when you are going to send a proposal, if you end up to the end, or if you wait up to the end, then you end up in sending a lousy proposal, which at the end, it will not get funding. So I really hope that you get this message very clear, and I wish you good luck with your research, and I know that you'll make it, because up to now we have got at IFS around 8,000 early career researchers like you that are all around the world doing research, but also supporting early career researchers. So thank you for your attention, and go back to Michelle for you.
Thank you so much, Nigitse. And I can see how your two presentations, Sandra and Nigitse, are kind of coming together to give the same message about yes, it's important to think about proposal development. It is key in this process, but that's not all. We also need to be strategic in this process. We need to be sure to ensure that we get the right information at the right time. If I got you well, Ningetse, the right time. And that we also think about the timing for us to even get into that exercise, especially if we are having other priorities around us. You also mentioned about the matching between our priorities as researchers and the priorities of the funding organization, which I think it's also a point that Sandra alluded to. We need to be sure that we know what are the key priorities of IFS, Idrc, and other funders out there. We don't just send a proposal, even if it is a nice one, but if it's not really within an organization, a funding organization mandate, then the proposal might not receive this response that you will be waiting for, and somehow might even discourage you in your process of being there and trying to develop proposals that can be funded. So thank you so much, Sandra and Ningitse. I can see a couple of questions coming. I will start with you, Sandra, on some questions here on the proposal development. Two aspects of it. The first part is on one of the participants is asking about how the letter of intent for the concept notes, how can it be created? Is it something that is done with the IDRC team, or it's done with whoever brings that to you? Is it every time or in a call frame? And I believe what the participant wanted to ask here is basically this idea of unsolicited versus call for proposal on this one. Now, there is this question that is, again, on the unsolicited proposal, on the people who actually lead that proposal to development and come to you. And one of our participants is asking if this has to be done only by the principal investigator, or are there others who can also lead this process? Let me start with this first round. Over to you, Sandra.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. The concept note or the letter of intent, the letter of intent will be a shorter version of a concept note, let's say, and this belongs to the institution that wants to apply. So in the context of unsolicited proposal, for instance, a group of investigators come together, they see a good potential of a research proposal, so they start writing it. And before going into a full proposal, they will submit it to different donors to assess if it's something of interest to them. So they will write something short. So normally it will be no more than 4 or 5 pages, even sometimes less, even just to tease, just to check, is it an idea that is appealing for IDRC or for ECIR or another donor? So this belongs to the institution or the group of institutions that want to develop a proposal that will be a full proposal later on if they see that we are interested. So it's really born in the organization. And most of the time, it would be the PI that would lead this process. Because if I go back a little bit to what are the different ways of getting funding from IDRC, from, I guess, the perspective of a young researcher, it would be either through research project, but there are also fellowships. Some fellowships that we fund are, for instance, managed by programs like Award, but there are also fellowships that are directly funded by IDRC. But to be eligible to that, you have to be registered in a Canadian university, which is sometimes not the very easy solution. So most of the time, young researcher will be integrated within a research proposal, but it has to be led by the institution, and the institution, the person responsible will most often be the principal investigator. But that doesn't prevent, for instance, the principal investigator to be the name behind the proposal and having a team working together to prepare the concept note. But IDRC will in the context of project development, will always enter into discussion with an institution that is represented by someone who has authority within the institution. And someone couldn't, for instance, present a research proposal if it doesn't have an institutional belonging. It has to be attached to an institution, because IDRC, when it will take the decision to fund the project, it will fund an institution, not an individual. It will fund an institution after a thorough process of analyzing the risk and so on and so forth. I don't know if I answer clearly the question.
I think so. And there are even some follow-up questions
Okay.
on what you're saying about the proposal development and who leads this process. And I have a question here, which is kind of linked to what you just said. And one of the participants is worried about the young researchers, the early career researchers, especially now that you're saying that IDSA is also thinking about funding larger proposal nowadays. Is there possibilities that these young researchers, emerging scientists, be attached to this proposal and be part of the consortium? And the other part of his question is on university. Are they actors or stakeholders in this process? Can we consider them in this consortium? Sandra?
Oh, yes. This shift towards more bigger project, consortium type project, will always leave room for young researchers. Indeed, in what I presented on the internal document that we have to prepare when we want a project to be approved, we also have to document if this project will contribute to the advancement of thought leaders, young researchers, and at what level. And indeed, this is something that we will put a lot of value in when we assess the value of a project. Most, if not all, of our project will have part of the funding that will be dedicated to master student, PhD student, doctoral student. And also, if we see that there is, for instance, a PI, which is well established, but the project that will also involve young researchers, that through this project, we hope that they will get some more confidence and experience, and they will get to be more close to become like autonomous researchers. This is something that we really value within IDRC. Even if the projects are getting bigger, there is more institution in it, and in each institution there are places for young researchers, for graduate students, for all of them. But as I said, everyone that is involved has to be attached to an institution, because IDRC will never establish a contract in the context of a project development. I'm not talking about the fellowships. In the context of a project, it will establish contract with institution, not individuals. So yes, there is definitely room. And about university, of course, traditionally, university has been our main interlocutor. University are very often involved in project. They are often lead of a consortium or a group of investigators. Sometimes we have several co-applicants and one lead applicant. University can be the lead, can be co-applicant. We see them everywhere. They are super present. We try to push our project to have also other groups that are part of the internal research team that are also highly linked to local communities, to associations of producers, for instance, indigenous communities, or a private sector. This is something we try to integrate more and more, but university has always been there, and they will remain very highly featured in IDRC's proposal. Because our main mission is to support Southern researchers and research institutions. So that's our mission. So yes.
Yeah. And I think it responds to the other question that I have here about IDRC funding small local NGOs. Are they eligible to this? And how do you evaluate their organizational capacity?
Yeah. Yes, this is a very good question, and we also value having NGOs and civil society part of the main research project. As I was mentioning, and you refer to that as well, Michelle, we really want the project that we fund not only to have an impact academically, but in the field. And to make sure that this happens, this means that within the core of the project, there has to be some other actors that are involved, not only university, but NGOs, private sector, local communities. So yes, NGOs are totally eligible. They have to be able to receive money from abroad, and there will be when we have other organizations that are not public, or like universities or any organization that will receive money from IDRC, there is always an evaluation of the risk for IDRC to invest money or fund a project that is led by this institution. And this will involve looking at all the documentation. This is something that IDRC will request from the institution to send to us. There will be, for instance, all the status of the institution financial statement that include expenses and incomes. We will look at auditor reports. We will look at organizational charts, policies, and procedures. So there will be a whole evaluation that will look at the risk, and there is a rating we have internally. So for this type of risk, we will have this type of follow-up with the organization that will have an impact on the reporting. How often will the institution have to present us financial report so that we are able to assess and help them along the project, and not wait till the end of the 3 years to find out that there is a big issue in the budget management or whatever, so that we can provide some support along the way, and we can help the team to assess different challenges that they face during the course of the project. So yeah, that would be on the financial part. On the, I don't know if the question was also referring to the capacity, the content, the scientific capacity. That will be done at the technical level from the program officer that will assess the different person that are within that are involved in the project that the institution is applying for. So what are the qualifications of the investigators? Have they published? What is the value of what they've been doing in the past? So all the content part will be assessed from the program officer's side. But as I say, we won't expect the whole team to be super high level. It's super okay to have also some people that will have other experience and that will bring some other perspectives. Sometimes people might not have even publication because they bring the link to policy, for instance.
Definitely. Diversity in the team is also key. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have a question here on a list of potential donors, and I've seen Ningitse has already responded. Someone asked that question also on the chat in French. La liste des potentiels donateurs est postée, Ningitse l'a postée sur le chat, donc vous pouvez aller sur le lien qui a été posté. And as they check what Ningitse has posted, I just want to also give this to you, Ningitse. One of the participants is saying, IFS contacted me to submit my revised proposal of 2019. And the question is about the chances for IFS funding for the proposal now that he's been recontacted. Is there anything you can say about this?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the chances are. Is that we have a call upon invitation, and we have contacted our grantees, which are in our system, to reapply their proposals and to send the applications in the given deadline. You have got 2 months open call, and if you do your work diligently, yes, of course, you will get a grant. If not, it's a high competition as usual, and we don't have enormous amount of money to give everybody grants, but the ones who compete and do their due diligence and they are one of the best, we will give the grant up to the limit that we can give the grant. It has been time that we were able to give to all who has succeeded, and there were times that due to financial constraints we cannot give even if the proposals are good. So if I were you, I will apply, I will give it my best, and see what you can do, unless you have got a better chance of getting direct funding without applying and going to a competition.
Great. I think Ningitse or or Sandra cannot tell you what your chances are. I think that's also why we are trying to bring those different aspects that you need to consider in your proposal development process. I believe their role is really to kind of support you in this process, that you can actually be able to submit a proposal that has taken care of all the different elements that we've talked about here. We've talked about in their different presentation. There is another question here about Idrc funding both government and non-government organization, and I think Sandra responded already on this, including the call for university to apply, which I believe many are from the government, national universities. So I think this response is there. I probably close this with a question to both of you. And that comes from our participant, one of our participants, who is asking about the maximum budget for each project. So I'm looking at both Ningitse and Sandra.
Okay,
whoever
Sandra?
wants to start.
I can start.
Okay, go ahead.
It depends. When we publish a call for proposals, most of the time we will give an idea of the bracket people can expect, so that we don't receive completely out of range proposal and people don't waste time preparing a budget for something that is not feasible for us. So normally we will say we will fund, let's say, up to five proposals for a maximum amount of the total initiative, or let's say 5 million. So then everybody could imagine that they can present a budget for around 1 million each, for instance. This is something that we sometimes do. Sometimes it's specifically said also maximum per proposal is that amount. And in practice, we have from a few $100,000 Canadian dollars to 1, 2, 3 million. Sometimes it happens. When it's bigger consortium, very specifically, it can be higher as well. But this then becomes something specific and yeah, a consortium type of proposal. But most of them will be around these days $1 million Canadian dollars, and will involve several countries and several institutions for that type of budget. And less, it could be for less institution, for instance. That's not something we have set in stone. It depends on the proposal, and it depends on the evaluation. And also there are some discussions. Sometimes we receive budget that seems to us that they are much more higher compared to similar projects, so that this will be discussed with the research team, for instance. And yeah.
Great. Ningitse, your thoughts about the same, the maximum budget?
I think as opposed to IDRC, our research grants are for individuals. And they're small budgets, and individuals, of course, when we give a grant to individuals have to be linked with an institution, and our grant agreement is always with an institution where the individual is located. So it's an individual grant, but it's contracted with the institution that the grant is. The maximum, we have a basic grant which goes up to $15,000 US per individual, and we have got what we call an advanced grant, which goes up to $20,000 per applicant per individual. So it's not like IDRC, it's not a consortium. We were having initially what we call a collaborative research, where 2-3 individuals were coming up and they can create a team, and we call it a team or a collaborative research. At the moment, we don't have that. And I'd like also to inform that we are also undergoing a very thorough review of our program to see on how we can adjust it better from what we have done for the future. So there might be some changes coming on, but for the moment, this is what we have.
Great. Thank you so much, Ningitse. And I can see Ingrid has added some more information on the chat. Please have a look at what she's added in terms of where you can find more information on the criteria, on the institutions, and even the potential donors for your work. And with this, I really want to thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Ningitse, because you've really shown interest in coming here today and sharing with us. We are very, very proud of the work that we actually do together, because you are not here randomly. We have IDRC supporting our work on One Planet Fellowship, and particularly the One Women project that is being funded by IDRC. And Sandra here is our program manager, and she never stopped supporting us technically, financially, adjusting the work that we are doing with them, with IDRC. And of course, Ningitse has been part of the award family from the very beginning with the work that we have been doing with IFS, and we are in this process where we want to bring them again more closer to us. So thank you so much for taking this time to be here with us today and sharing your experience. We are really hopeful that this will be of help to our early career, but even others who have now maybe at their mid-career at a more advanced level, and that this gives them some tips on how to better approach the proposal development efforts. So thank you so much. And of course, this process, even if we don't need to have a paper, a journal article, it's still something that can boost our proposal development. And that's why we have also invited a couple of journal editors, scientists here to help us also on that other side of our work as scientists. And here I want to invite Prof. Sheila to take over from here and to bring us those perspectives from the journal editors. Prof, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you also to the previous presenters. So now that we have won a grant from IDRC and IFS, and we have done research, collected data, and we have our findings, how do we communicate the finding to our audience or to the users? Now, the barrier in most cases to our communication is frequently the rigorous process of peer review. So today, I'm honored to introduce to you Patrick Jovi. Patrick is a professor of biotechnology and food technology at University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Patrick is a member of the joint FAO-WHO Expert Committee on Food Additives and a consultant of the AU Inter-African Bureau for Animal Resources. He has 180 publications as book chapters and also as journal papers with an index of 25 and 2006 citations. Patrick is a reviewer for over 20 scientific journals, and he is also an editorial board member of Mycotoxins Research Journal. So Patrick, welcome Patrick, to guide us on how to write a good paper. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Sheila. What a nice introduction. I just want to greet everyone else here. And thank you for the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my little experience. Let me share my slide. Okay, let me share this. So I have 20 minutes, right? Okay, if you can all hear me. I'm going to be presenting on the publishing year results, and I happen to have had the opportunity to come up with this presentation together with my master's supervisor, Professor Idrc. And so before we begin, we need to just understand what research is all about. So here, I just want to steal from Professor Rob's exactly what research is all about. It's about reasoning, and its focus should be on the end users, and it must be statistically sound. And then over time, as you carry research, you gain some experience. And research can either be applied or basic or both, which could be frontier research. And then they could prove. And then it must be relevant. And once research is carried out, it must be communicated. And it involves a lot of hard work. But what does it really mean? The word research means really sound very serious, but actually it's really fun for those who are really doing it. And we have to start from somewhere by asking specific questions. What is research? Why do we do research? What is it like? What do we do research on? Is it on topics or questions, and why? Indeed, research comes from a French word, recherche, which means to investigate thoroughly. And by its definition, is a systematic quest to acquire knowledge. And in other words, it's a way of thinking. So it has two syllables, re, which means again or anew, and then search, meaning to examine closely or thoroughly. But why do research? In fact, to get joy of doing something creatively. And sometimes research comes with some degree of respectability, because the person doing the research is recognized, and usually research is done to actually save society. So without research, indeed, we will be naked, we will be homeless, we will be penniless, and certainly we wouldn't even be sitting here listening to one another. What is research like? Here it involves the application of various scientific methods and techniques in order to really create scientifically obtained data or knowledge by using objective methods and procedures. Usually, research involves data collection, statistical analysis, and decision-making. So one of the criteria or characteristics of research is that it is systematic. And most research usually involves taking a sample from a population. Why? Because of cost, logistic reasons, and it can really be time consuming if you have to study the entire population. And then it also gives some degree of accuracy. So once research is carried out, it is published in various forms. Scientific reports, which could be in the form of dissertation or thesis. It could be conference, where your abstracts are published or full papers. It could also be published as in peer-reviewed journals in the form of either a review paper or it could be an original research. Also published in book chapters or books. And then you have other electronic media outlets where research is published. So why publish? Actually get new knowledge out there to the end users, and publish because it enhances reputation of that particular researcher. So here we increases the chances of just of getting a job, getting research grants, and it also provides easy passage for thesis and dissertation for students that have actually published from that thesis or dissertation. And it also brings career progression. Here you have the syndrome of either you publish or you perish. And funding bodies usually like to recoup or to regain their scholarship cost. So that's why they always encourage publications. What are the tricks to this trade? You have to get a very good mentor or supervisor to work with you closely. So usually research, you publish a research usually in high rank or high impact factor journals. That is encouraging. And usually you go for those highly popular journals. And then usually, as I mentioned, research publication is usually important for PhD research. And normally target should be for high impact factor journals. And then when doing research, never manipulate data. And usually instructions are followed for a particular journal. And be yourself when reporting. Use simple, clear language that is understandable by many. So usually publications, like when you target journals or authors or more senior researchers, usually it's encouraging you target the big fives. And cohort, if you have the means, you should be able to co-author with heavyweights. And also you cite heavyweights, articles published by heavyweights. And then also read from them and usually acknowledge heavyweights and the big funding bodies. Usually when doing so, you need to be aware of heavyweight baggage. Like you have some rock scientists. Now, to break down the content of a journal paper or whatever, be it a book chapter or a book, usually you have to write an abstract or a summary. Usually you begin sometimes with the introduction and sometimes the abstract is written last. Why do you have to write the abstract last? Sometimes because you are now able to come up with a summary of what has been written within the body of that paper. And then you have to keep the abstract within the stipulated length. I always encourage that abstract should be a maximum of between 300 to 500 words, and it should end with keywords. So here you start the abstract with what was done, what was the aim of that study you wanted to meet or to achieve. And then you should highlight key findings when writing your abstract. And you should end your abstract with some conclusion or a concluding remark. And usually the abstract can be really what people may just want to read, to come up with a summary, especially for those that may not really have sufficient time to read the entire document. So the introduction follows the abstract. Here, a question is usually a question and the answer section. So what is or are those key issues? What is known about the issue or subject you want to tackle? What is unknown? What do you really want to do now? Brings you where you can formulate a hypothesis, but actually not all researches are hypothesis driven. So if you are carrying out a research that is not hypothesis driven, then you can just go straight to your problem statement and objectives. And then you include some few references, and you shouldn't exceed the introductory section with more than 2 pages. So for materials and methods, usually it's best to write this as the experiment progresses, and is written in past tense and must be narrative. And usually these are some of the aspects to include the experimental design, the statistical analysis, whatever equipment or facilities that were used, and then what are the sources. So here, the scientific methods that were followed are described, and then provide references wherever applicable. So here you need to explain and sometimes justify why you use a particular method. Finally, it is important to really add any extra information or observations, such as changes that you've made with regards to that particular method you are describing. And it's written in paragraph format with as little repetition as possible. Here you can subsection that section, such as participants, materials, methods. And usually past tense is used when describing these methods. For example, you can say a dilution series was performed. The participants were instructed to. Here, a passive voice is sometimes used as it aims to really give to foreground the action that was taken rather than the doer of the action. Take, for example, moisture was removed as opposed to we removed moisture. There are usually examples of good and bad methodology write-ups. Then from their results, from their materials and methods section, it takes you then to the results. And here you present only key findings. So, but there are usually some expectations. For example, when you don't have any effect at all or lack of significance, but that should be included. And sometimes it takes, you have to take one variable and present at the time in a logical sequence. What exactly did you do? The procedures that you were following, what results you were obtaining, and then you present them in that logical manner. And here you don't really, in the results section, you don't really have to explain your results or discuss them. And usually you describe, but you do not really explain your results as I indicated, and you draw attention to specific trends as far as your data is concerned that you think are really important. And you make your results as comprehensible as possible for your reader or assessor. And normally you should vary the pattern. You don't really have to be monotonous in presenting your findings. For example, you can say the results of food contamination by mycotoxins are presented in table 1, or mycotoxin contamination levels varied with increasing storage temperature. Or table 3 shows the results of changes in visceral organ weight of birds fed mycotoxin contaminated diets. And if you are presenting your statistical results, you should begin by presenting descriptive statistics. For example, means and standard deviation. Then you can then be followed by the results of any inferential statistical test that was performed. So here there is also there should be an indication of any transformations to your data, the data you are presenting. E.g., you may report percentage correct scores rather than straight scores, and raw data and lengthy hold transcript of quality data should be put in the appendix section. Only excerpts should be included in the results section, especially when dealing with qualitative data. And then in the discussion section, when discussing your result, this is usually one of the most difficult sections for beginners. And there are usually 2 patterns. It could be results and discussions are combined rather than the results and discussions being separate. Here it is really deceptively simple when discussing results and discussion within the same section. And it's easy to keep an eye on the results being discussed. But when we are dealing with results and discussions separate, usually it's easier to link discussion of different findings. And we could opt for this if allowed by journals, and in particular, noting this in the format for thesis and dissertation writings in Nigeria or in South Africa or any other country. Here, in the discussion section, you identify key findings, and in the discussion section, there are 2 fundamental aims therein: to explain the results of your study and to explore the significance of those results. So here you need to interpret and explain your results, examine whether and how the questions raised in the introductory section of your paper have been answered, and you show how your findings relate to what is published already in the literature. And you have to qualify and explore the theoretical importance or significance of those findings. And then there should be an outline of any new research questions that could be raised from what was done or areas for future research that the results are proposing. So you can do one of the combination of explaining the nature of the findings, linking responses to factors, explaining the significance of those findings, and relating findings to those that previous researchers published. So here the discussion is usually the place where any qualifications or reservations you have about the research should be aired out. And statistical significant results still require analysis and discussion. So we might consider questions like the ones below. How generally do the results apply? How close to real life are the variables manipulated in the laboratory situation? Were there any defects as far as the experimental design or procedures are concerned? Were there any confounding factors in the design? And there are usually common pitfalls where you find writers do a representation of the results within the results discussion section, where you have collection of unrelated ideas. And sometimes it start writing again as if it is another literature review, and then references to tables and figures and inclusion of significant, statistical significant values. And then the concluding section is the section that gives us a brief summary of all previous key sections within the body of the paper in a much detailed manner than in the abstract, and may include indications of what future trends as far as research is concerned could be necessary. And here in the conclusion section, please, no references are cited. So we have common languages and that could be used. So you have special conjunctions, especially, for example, you have as well as, along with, etc. Here, the sentence is maintained in a singular form. For example, relative humidity as well as temperature affects productivity. And you shouldn't start your sentences with abbreviations or figures or because, but comparative and superlative terms should be used where you have greater, we typically go with than. Greatest is the superlative and does not really compare in the comparative sense of it. More does not really go with superlative terms, but much can be used. So much better is okay, but not more longer. So we learn to use the definite articles there. Okay, Sarah will be giving a presentation subsequently on the review process that are taking place. So we will not really be spending much here. And then sometimes she will also be discussing how to deal with examiners or reviewers when we either have positive or negative feedbacks. And then, as I said, we should target journals with high impact factor journal. And high impact factor is usually based on the number of times the articles published within that journal within the past 2 years cited or downloaded up, and then usually calculated in the 3rd year. So here, journal impact factor does not actually measure the impact of any specific paper within that journal, and always consider economic and personal impact that journal can put forth. Here, we also look the strength of the journal based on the impact of the journal or your article based on this number of citations that are generated. And usually it's the number of downloads, the number of papers that are, your paper, the number of times that they have been cited. So there are other ways to assess the impact of your research. If you are part of ResearchGate or LinkedIn, you should be able to get in the RG score of and of your papers that have been downloaded or cited. And then it's also based on the number of times people have viewed your profile, and they also viewed your publications, as well as the number of times publications have been downloaded. And you also look at the number of followers you also have. So we should also guard against predatory journals. Here is the death of the journal. And be watchful and inquisitive. Always avoid predatory conferences as well. So when dealing to summarize what we are saying here, so is that early career researchers should be actually brave to share their research experience, and then there must be perseverance sometimes. And then you also have zombie manuscripts. I refer to these manuscripts as those manuscripts that actually reject your paper and don't actually let your manuscript die. And do not be put off when you have rejection, or acceptance puts you in good company though. And most high impact factor journals usually reject about 50% of what they have received in terms of submissions. And rejection means you are aiming high, and editors do go to heaven, as we say. Publishing, never give up, and because publishing is actually a prestige. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your very clear and systematic presentation. And now we have a good paper. We have written a good paper. And many times we wonder, why is the journal not getting back to me? It's been long. I submitted my paper 3 months ago. What is happening? So I have the pleasure now of introducing you to Sarah Isiga. Sarah is a professor at the University of Ghent in Belgium. So she's speaking to us all the way from Belgium. She's also the head of the Center of Excellence in Mycotoxicology and Public Health Center of University of Ghent. She was awarded the Ghent University Prometheus Award for research, and she's leading several proposals, the EU Horizon 2020, Hercules, Expoms Grant, FWO, and many others. Sarah has 370 reviewed papers and has an H index of 51. She has been a section editor of the World Mycotoxin Journal from 2008 to 2016. And since 2016, she is the section editor in chief of the Toxins Journal. So welcome, Sarah, to tell us what happens in the reviewing process and the importance of writing a good rebuttal letter.
Hello, Sheila. Thanks a lot for this very nice introduction. I will start by sharing my screen. Okay, I hope it is fine. I hope everybody can see it. If not, please let me know. So indeed, as Professor Sheila Okot was telling, I'm from Ghent University. I'm also coordinating the Mytoxalt network for capacity building on mycotoxin analysis. And so it's my pleasure to tell you also that I'm working together with Professor Sheila Okot on this and Professor Patrick and Jovi. Now, for today, I will indeed talk about two things. First of all, the peer reviewing process. And after that, I will discuss with you the importance of writing a good rebuttal letter. Now, first concerning the peer reviewing process. So one important point there, it's about
peer. So those people who will read and review your process are your peers. So they are also working in the same field as you do. So they have another maybe view on the research that you have done. So therefore, I really would like also to emphasize the importance of publishing only in journals where we have a peer reviewing process, because that will help your research. It will help you to have a better kind of research. So therefore, please avoid any predatory journal, avoid journals which are not ranked in for instance, PubMed or Web of Science. So please, if you want to value your research, go towards the peer-reviewed journals. And I think in the next presentation, it will also be further discussed how to select a journal. So, and next to that, of course, it's also always important to select a good supervisor or good co-authors who can help you to prepare a very nice publication as addressed by Professor Jovi. So, but now at this part of my presentation, so it means you have written your paper and you have submitted it to a journal. So here I would say congratulations, you have reached a milestone, and you can have a look to these nice comics, because I know for some people it's really very difficult to start the writing process, but when you're there, it gives you a very nice feeling. But I said almost there, indeed, as Professor Okot said, then you have some time to wait. And indeed, it's possible that you will have to wait a long time, because the peer reviewing process can take from maybe several weeks till sometimes several months. This depends on the journal and also on the whole process. So there are journals who are really very fast, and there are journals who are very, very slow. So after a while, you happen to know which ones are the ones that you need when you want a fast publication of your paper. But on this slide, so you can see the different steps. So first of all, you need to submit your article, and for that you have to follow all the instructions which you can find on the paper website, on the journal website. So there it's very clearly discussed how you have to do it, but please follow all those rules and just follow what they are writing. So then you can submit it through their digital platform, and then yes, then the process starts for the journal. So first of all, your article will be assessed by an editor. Now, how this process goes, which editor is selected, I will discuss in the next slide, but it depends from journal to journal. Now, the worst thing that can happen at that time is that you get back feedback from the editor very fast. I mean, if you get the next day or 2 days later already a feedback from the editor, then mostly it's with bad news that your paper is rejected. So this can go very fast. This doesn't mean that your paper is bad or that the content is not good. Mostly the editor is going to reject your paper because it doesn't fit in the scope of the journal. For instance, the editor thinks that it's better that you send your publication to another journal. But it can also be, for instance, if you want to submit in the highest impact factor journals like Nature, or I don't know what type, or Science, or those type of journals, the rejection rate there is very, very high, and it's very difficult to get an accepted paper there. So rejection can be for several reasons. Now, if there is no rejection, that's good news. Then it means that the editor will send your paper to reviewers. So mostly those are 2, 3 to 4 reviewers. So the reviewers are your peers, so are also scientists in your field. Okay, so when it's sent to the reviewers, then of course it depends on how long the reviewer take to read your paper. Some of them are very fast and read it in the next week. Others, for them, it takes more than a month. So this is very difficult also as an editor to ask the reviewers to be in time. Then after a while, fortunately, so all the reviews will be received by the editor. Then the editor will check all the reviews. And sometimes, for instance, when there is a conflict between reviewer 1 and reviewer 2, it's possible that the editor assigns another reviewer. So then maybe a further review is needed and he or she will select a next reviewer. And then, okay, the process will start again and the editor has to wait for all the reviews. All right, then what can happen? There are 3 different possibilities. First of all, but this mostly doesn't happen immediately, that your paper is accepted. So most of the time, your paper is not immediately accepted. So it hasn't or almost didn't happen also to my research group, that we have nothing to change. So most of the time you have to change something, but it can be very minor and then it's easily accepted and it goes to production and publication. What's also possible is that after the review process, so maybe after 2 or 3 or even longer time, that you get the news, sorry, it's rejected. That's of course not very nice, but also here you can learn from it and then maybe you can send it to another journal, but take the comments that were made, why the paper was rejected, take them with you and improve your paper and send it to another journal. But what happens most of the time is that you need revisions, like major revisions. So you make the revisions and you resubmit the revised manuscript. And then again, you have this review process. So this can go on for maybe, yeah, most of the time it's just once you revise and then mostly it's accepted. But it's also possible that you revise and that again, you need to make some revisions. So it's like a circle of different steps here. So concerning the, a little bit more insights in the process, how a journal works. As said, I was a section editor in World Mycotoxin Journal, and now I'm a section editor-in-chief of the Toxins Journal. All journals have a different approach. So for some, mostly there is an editor-in-chief who is the overarching editor dealing with the several subsections of a journal. Then you have section editors-in-chief, as I am, concerning the mycotoxins in the Toxins Journal. But next to that, you also have different other editors. So a journal mostly works with an editorial board, with an editorial board of different editors. So, and then when they receive your paper, it will depend on the topic to which editor it will be sent and who will take care of your paper and the whole reviewing process. Now, the reviewers also there, some journals work with a reviewer board, so they have a fixed reviewer board, but most journals also ask you to give to give a proposal of reviewers. So then you can select and think yourself who could be a good reviewer of your paper. Here, of course, it's very important to declare any conflict of interest. So you cannot ask anybody from your own research group, for instance, to review your paper, or anybody you have very close contacts with. So this is very important. It's very important to select the reviewers, and please dare to select also scientists very high quality scientists. So don't be afraid that they will immediately reject your work. That's not the case. They will improve your work. That's the most important thing you will learn from them. So select good reviewers, and if you can propose yourself. But of course, at the end, it's the editor who will select and decide on which reviewers he or she will invite. And the editor will also check possible conflicts of interest when selecting and inviting the reviewers. All right, then it's the time for you to wait, and waiting nowadays, it's more easy than before, because now you can easily check the status of your paper. So where is it at the moment? This is just an example of one paper, of one journal, where you can see, for instance, at the moment I have there something which the revisions are being processed. But you can really see where everything is there. For instance, waiting for author's approval, when you have a declined revision. So everything is there. So just have a look sometimes and see where your paper is in the process. If it takes much too long, according to you, you can politely write to the editor and ask about the status. So it's possible, and then sometimes you get some more information why it takes such a long time. But patience here is, let's say, the best thing you can do. Just some examples of reviewers' reports. And here this is in fact the work of the editor. So the most easy work for an editor is if all reviewers have a similar report, and for instance, all say accept after minor revision, then the editor will easily decide and also make the final decision. So it will not go back anymore to the reviewers. Same for the opposite. When you have a rejection by 2 reviewers and a major revision by another, then the editor will also probably reject it. The most difficult work for the editor, and mainly for the section editor-in-chief, so that's when the papers, when I receive the papers, is when there are conflicting reports. So as you can see in this example, if one reviewer says reject and the other say accept, then the editor-in-chief needs to see why there is such a conflicting report and has to make the final decision. This is sometimes difficult, but sometimes very easy, because sometimes you see that somebody rejects it on the basis of not really scientific basis, or the opposite can also be that a reviewer just didn't take the time to read it and accept it very easily. So then this is a very important task of the editor-in-chief. Yes, so there can be different reviewing rounds, and it's very important that after receiving the comments, that you really convince the reviewers that your work is valuable and that you have done a lot of efforts to improve it. So you need to convince them, and I will discuss that in the next part of my presentation. But also bear in mind that even after a long process, it's still possible that they reject your paper. At that time, it's very, it's not nice to hear it, but you always have to have a mindset where you think, okay, it's like that. They have a ground, they have a basis why they rejected. So now it's up to me that I have to improve my work and my publication, and maybe after rejection, just resubmit it to another journal. But of course, take care of the comments that were given by the reviewers, but because possibly if you send it to another journal, you will get again the same comments. Good, this brings me to the second and final part of my presentation. And this is very, very important. It's about how to write a rebuttal for reviewers. So how can you convince the reviewers that what you have changed and revised in your paper is improving your work. So some general rules. You must know that each reviewer spends substantial time, at least good reviewers who really take their job seriously. So they spend a lot of time, and you will see that if you have a lot of comments, it means that the reviewer really did a good job. So the first thing you really have to do is to thank the reviewer in your letter, in your rebuttal letter, for the efforts to increase the quality of the work. You always have to remain polite. Don't start arguing in an unpolite way. If there is something that you are not if you're not agreeing on something, that's possible, but please write it in a polite way why you don't agree with the comment, and then also give the arguments why you don't agree. Make the rebuttal easy to follow and point by point, because the reviewer doesn't want to spend, again, a lot of time to read your revised work. So it's easy if, for instance, you use track changes in your revised manuscript and also add an additional clean version, plus a point-by-point rebuttal letter. So, and then some do's and don'ts, some examples, and you can see I've also put some examples on PhD thesis. Of course, it's different, so I won't go into detail with that, but it can also be useful if some of you are performing their PhD. Also there, you need to write rebuttals when receiving the comments of your reviewers. So, but this is just an example, for instance, how we will start. The authors would like to thank the editor and reviewers for their time and efforts, and so on. They provided important adjustments and suggestions to improve the quality and like that. So you start with this kind of general response, and then you make 3 files. You make a separate rebuttal letter, a separate adjusted manuscript with revised with revisions in color or track changes, and a separate revised clean manuscript. Now, just some don'ts. First of all, if, for instance, reviewer 1 tells you on lines this and this, the reference is missing, then don't answer like this, like the reference or edit dot. That's not okay. So this is too short answer. Here you can then see what you should answer, like the authors thank the reviewer for the remark, the references have been added, namely blah, 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 and are, you can find them in reference 11 and 12 at lines and so on. So it's always very, very important to refer to the lines where you have put the changes. So that is really important. Then the reviewer can easily find back your corrections and also put them in a color in your revised manuscript. Same here. This is also not how to do it. Not right like, yeah, I adjusted the text. No, you have to say, what have you changed? And for instance, here you can say the authors fully support the statement made in the manuscript, but we understand it should be more clarified and so on. And therefore we added the following section, and you have to, the best is to repeat it also in the rebuttal letter. So that's very clear for the reviewer. Yeah, same here. This is an example of a PhD. Yes, don't just write, oh no, what you ask, it falls beyond the scope of my work. It's possible that the reviewer really wants you to go a little bit outside of the real scope of your work, that you give some other background information. So also add that in a good way. Yes, this is also an example. For example, what food groups are contributing to diseases, then just don't answer, yes, we were not able to do that. We were not able to construct because of time. That's not a good answer. So then sometimes really you need to perform extra analysis to further improve your paper. So if they really ask to do additional analysis, please do it. Also, yeah, sometimes it takes more time and efforts, but if you really want your publication, you have to do it. Okay, these are just some other examples to show that it's important always to refer where you have changed, what you have changed, and put it in a column. Yeah, rebuttal letters for papers, normally don't make them too long. So try to be as concise and efficient as possible. For PhDs, it's different. There, it's possible that you really need extensive rebuttal letters where you have for one question, like 1 page of rebuttal. But for papers, try to be more concise. So, and I see my time is up, and I would like to wish you good luck and lots of patience and lots of energy to improve your paper according to these tips and tricks that I gave you. So, thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation that has loosened us a little. You have reminded us that the review process is actually a friendly process that will only help to improve our manuscripts. And like Patrick said, reviewers also go to heaven. So I think all of us now are loosened, and we can look at it as a positive process. Thank you very much. So now I will take up questions. So to Patrick.
Yes.
You define the number of pages for each component, for abstract, results, and so on. What is the spacing for this? Doesn't it depend on the journal? And
exactly.
Is it good to cite my own results?
Of course. Yeah, normally the paragraph spacing it is determined by the journal itself. There are instructions given. And there is nothing wrong in you doing self-citation. But don't just cite your articles just because you want to increase the number of citations. At least it must be whatever you are citing from your past published papers must be relevant to what you are writing.
And Patrick, many times we are told to use current journals to show that we are informed. Now, at what point do we stop using old protocols, given that we may be having old equipment in our laboratories, and so we use the old methods?
There is no specific time. If the method is simple and actually scientific, there's nothing wrong in you making use of it. But actually, if you are using up to date, the chances of you getting more data using recent instrumentations, they are quite high than the old ones. For example, LCMS, MS, latest ones actually go to the extent of even unraveling, probably coming up with new compounds that if you use old instruments like HPLC, you wouldn't be able to get such data.
So 2 more questions to you, Patrick. I have old equipment in the laboratory, so my methods will be old. Do I still have a chance of publishing in high impact journal? And then the second question, how do I identify predatory conferences and predatory journals?
The first one is that if you don't have any means of using latest instruments, then you use what you have. But the chances also for publishing using old instruments are slimmer, but it doesn't really mean that they will be rejected. And your writing style too is really what counts. If you have very good data and you've not written well, you've not presented the data very well, the chances are that that paper will be rejected. They are quite high. And coming now to identify which are those predatory journals, they are fairly simple. They are instructions. Sometimes they just tell you that if you pay the publication fee, the paper will be accepted. But there is a BS list that are constantly being updated, where you will find a list of those predatory journals as well as conferences.
Okay, maybe Patrick, you can give us a link of that on the chat. Can you find it and throw it in the chat?
Yeah, I think it's just to do Google search, say BS list, and you can additional keyword to there. It could be predatory journals, and you will find a list of them. There are many of them.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much.
Yes, and when you target a particular journal, it is often necessary that you go to that journal, get a list of other published articles to see, because if you say you are in the field of mycotoxicology and you go and you look for a list, you don't find like the overweight, as I mentioned, you don't find them publishing in that journal, just go away. Don't just get involved. And it's often like you have Sarah being, I think, within the editorial board of World Mycotoxin Journal, as well as toxins, then it really goes a long way to demonstrate the credibility of that journal, especially if you really know who Sarah is. So I will always advise that you seek advice. See, you are targeting this particular journal. Yeah, any idea, and look at the publishers as well. And then you find that some of these predatory journals, their names are almost synonymous with credible journals. So you have to be very careful. Or publishers. The publishers, you find that the names are almost the same. Maybe it's just limited being added there. But if you are not careful, you might miss that out.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Now to Sarah, what is the better choice for publishing options? Open access or subscription?
Thanks.
And the second question to Sarah, how do you recognize the fraudsters from the real ones, especially when both ask for money for publishing?
Okay, yeah, for the first question, open access or subscription, for instance, it is some funding agencies are more and more really asking that you have open access publication, because if your research has been paid by government money, then they want that your research is open for the whole world, for the whole public. So in that respect, it's, yeah, let's say it's better to have open access publication, but of course, then you have to pay a fee. And for some journals, it's really very, very high fee. Subscription is mostly free of charge. So it's also very good, but of course, then it's not open for everybody. And then you for instance, you have to send your reprints to people who ask for it. Now at the university here in Ghent, but I don't know if that is a general way of working. Here we have an embargo period, and after some time, after I think 6 months, all publications should become open access, also those ones who have a subscription paper. But it takes a while before they become open access. So yeah, it depends, of course, on the amount of money you have. Some funding agencies really also provide you the money to publish in open access, and then I would prefer to go to open access. Now, to find the difference between fraudulous journals and the good ones, I think it's indeed answered by Patrick. So you have this list of predatory journals. So yeah, the best is to check PubMed or Web of Science to see, or Science citation report to see which journals are the good ones. Yeah, and please discuss with your co-authors also. Maybe they know also which one is the best journal. Always do that in consultation with the co-authors.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Patrick, for your presentations. And now I think we can all go and publish. You have put us in a state where at least it's not a fear now, but rather a process where reviewers are there just to help us and to improve on our manuscript. And also you have encouraged us not to give up. We should never give up on a manuscript that we have started writing. If it's rejected in one, you use the comments to improve on it and try and submit to another journal. And also an important thing before you start the journey of publishing, make sure that you have selected, you have read through the website of the journal to find out if your paper fits the journal so that you don't waste time. So many times the reject is not because your paper is not fit, but because probably it is not relevant for the theme of that journal. So thank you very much, Sarah and Patrick. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And now I take again the opportunity to welcome our last speaker, Professor Peter Pujambo. Peter is a professor at North Carolina State University. So he's speaking to us all the way from North Carolina. Peter is a member of the Center for Integrated Fungal Research and a faculty fellow in the Center for Geospatial Analysis at NC State University and a member of the Advisory Council for the USDA Southern Region IPM Center based in Raleigh, North Carolina. His research programs focus on theoretical and applied epidemiology of plant diseases and pathogen population biology. Peter has served as senior editor for phytopathology from 2017 to 2020 and as a senior counselor at large for the American Phytopathological Society from 2019 to 2020. So currently, Peter is serving as editor for plant pathology and plant protection science journals. Welcome, Peter.
Okay. Thank you, Sheila. Can you hear me well?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we can.
So I'm gonna share my screen so that you can see what I'm gonna be talking about. Let's see. Okay, thank you, Sheila, for that introduction. And because I'm the last person between everybody else and dinner or lunch, depending on where you are, I'm gonna keep this short and to the point. So before I start, I just wanna thank again Sheila and Michelle for the invitation to come and talk to this group regarding publication, citation index and that kind of stuff. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is just based on my own experience and a little bit of literature from that I was able to glean from the web. All right, so I was asked to talk about selecting a journal for publication and talk a little bit about bias in science. And I'm not gonna dwell so much on the analytics of it, but just provide some examples just to help guide the process. So. All right, as most of you know, we have several journals that are out there, and so how do we go about selecting the most appropriate journal for where to publish your work? I just did a simple search And Scopus, just recently, there are about 2,500 journals. That's an enormous number of journals that, that you can potentially select to publish your work. But I mean, this process can be daunting, particularly for authors that are new to publishing, and as well as authors that are publishing on a new topic, particularly if you're doing something a little bit new. So how do you make sure that it's actually going to the right audience? So that can be challenging as well. And as Sarah and Patrick has talked about, I mean, there are some new models now, that publishers are offering. They are offering things like First Look or Online First. You have open access vis-a-vis traditional subscription models. And a lot of this has been done primarily to sort of help, authors to be able to reach a wider audience in terms of their research, which is a good thing, that this publishing agency is actually doing. But as Patrick and Sarah said, I mean, we need to be a little bit cautious, particularly when you look at some of the journals. You talked about predatory journals. Some of journals are very dishonest in what they do. Some practice, deceptive practices, but others do claim to perform peer review, but they don't. And so, the authors that are, sending your papers there, it's our responsibility to make sure that we avoid this kind of journals and make sure that our research goes into the right journal framework. So because of that, therefore, us as the authors, it's our responsibility to make sure that we conserve the knowledge that actually we're developing in terms of the integrity, the history, and the practice that is actually published in the right framework. And so, if here in the United States, the National Institute of Health has come up with guidelines of actually, recommendations to ensure that there's integrity in science, and some of this include adhering to principles of research integrity and publication ethics. Be careful in identifying the journals that follow the best practices, and then of course avoid journals that don't have a clearly stated peer review process. So how do we go about evaluating some of the reputation of these journals? One thing that I'll probably do first is just list the journals that you want to consider, depending where you want to send your work in. And as I said previously by Patrick as well as Sarah, consult your mentors and colleagues. Say, okay, I have this piece of work, I want it to be published. What are some of the opinions that you have? And some of the recommendations that they might have for you. Some of the other things to consider also is scientific rigor for the journal of interest. For example, look at the editorial quality and the editorial board. That will give you an idea on how that particular journal takes science seriously. And also consider things to do with ethics. Do the journal have statement on plagiarism, for example, conflicts of interest and that kind of stuff? I'm always hesitant, sending my papers to journals that don't have a clear statement on research ethics. And also be aware of journals, that are email solicitations that come in to publish, to send you to inbox, or if you have this particular journal, we want to ask you to contribute your stuff there. Be cautious, because some of this might end up being some of those predatory journals as well. But as far as we know, the impact factors, we use them very well, to make a case of our papers, how much we're doing. But also it's important to note this can also be superior in other situations, particularly if the journals are not well known, they've not been there for very long, and people really don't know what they're doing. If they have no clear statement, the review process, ethics and that kind of stuff, you should also be careful when select those kind of journals as well. So what are some of the steps that one can take to be able to select a journal? The first thing that one does, and we do this all the time, is do a Google search, type in the name phytopathology or plant disease or frontiers in applied mathematics or statistics, for example, then go to the journal section, and look at some of the information that's actually about the journal. You can look at the author guidelines or for author section and just get some information on what the journal is all about. So here I made a matrix of something that you can actually do. And this actually is available in the paper by Safri and Bakeri that was published in 2020, where they list very simple steps that people can actually do, particularly young researchers, people introducing themselves to publishing, they can actually follow quite quickly. The first one is to look at peer review. Is the you list your journals 1, 2, 3, 4, make a matrix of it, look at whether it's peer reviewed, yes or no, and look at the audience. What's the target audience for your paper? Which people do you want the paper to be read, for example, and the journal audience that you're actually looking at, and then determine whether there's a match between what you want to present, what to publish, and the requirements for that particular journal. Then also look at the manuscript type. Are you interested in publishing a research study, a review article, a short communication, and does that match the journal itself? And then the last item is to look at the copyright and the publishing model. And we have the subscription, which is a traditional approach, and then open access, and look at those journals, whether they have one or the other. I think Sarah sort of responded to this with a subscription of open access. And most of the time, if it's open access, if you want to do that, do you have the money to do it, and that kind of stuff. So those are some of the things that one can actually consider to be able to decide whether which particular journal they can publish. But priority, regardless of the situation, the priority should be given to journals that have a peer review process, the journal that matches your audience and your manuscript type. And then a publishing model that matches your needs, whether it's open access subscription, what is your need as the author? You have a lot of leverage in what to determine and what to do there. If you have the money, open access, you can go for open access, of course. If you don't, the subscription journals, of course, require you, other journals require you to pay charges, of course, which are much lower than what you would pay for an open access journal. These are very simple steps that, one can actually easily follow when sort of selecting a particular journal to consider for their research. So I'm going to switch gears in the next half of my presentation and talk about a little bit about the bias, regional-based bias in terms of science, and what we do, and how do we go about detecting bias, and what does that really mean in terms of the papers that we publish. So, as most of you know, when we talk about bias, there are different types of the bias that we look at. But right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the publication bias, which is we talk about the journals where you're presenting your papers and that kind of stuff. And so the publication bias is basically looking at publishing papers that have high large effects, where, for example, papers that are high, their significant results and that kind of stuff are highly more likely to be published than papers that are showing negative results, and often, for example, when you, as Sarah indicated, and even Patrick, for example, significance testing, determines, to what extent your work can actually be published as well. But, there are positive results, studies, and negative results. Each of these actually gives us information about our work and what really needs to be done. And particularly when you're looking at a holistic form of this research work that can be synthesized over the years, the publishing of positive or negative results, really impact the general knowledge that is actually out there in the field. Particularly when you're conducting some meta-analysis, for example, where you synthesize research results to make some general recommendations, like fungicide efficacy, for example. If we are systematically biased in what is being published, of course, then that is going to will affect some of the recommendations that we make. This bias can be a random subset, basically where the results that are not being published is actually a random subset. That's okay, but if it's a systematic elimination of studies just because they're not effective or they're not publishing positive results, then of course that can actually affect the quality of the recommendations that we get out there. So besides publication bias, the other biases as well, one of the most important ones is actually the language bias. Most of the database we have there are in English. And so whenever you Google and search for papers, on the web, Google search, most of the stuff that you get is going to probably be in English. And already that's a bias because non-English studies are probably not going to show up there. Availability bias, this is also based on, what the author is actually have access to, depending on the fees or whatever it is, people have certain databases and they don't have others. And then of course, cost bias, studies are relatively easier to publish and free to publish. Of course, that will determine, which kind of database that you have access to. And then familiarity bias, people tend to go to the discipline they're more familiar with, and that kind of stuff. And that also can also lead into some biasness in terms of what is actually presented. And then duplication bias, where similar to, citation bias, where, you're citing more statistically significant studies much more often than studies that are not significant. And that citation bias can also have an impact on the results of when one is synthesizing some of these studies, particularly that have been done over so many years to determine what are some of the fundamental factors that can affect, for example, fungicide efficacy, or when you're talking about trials like for medicine, like for COVID vaccine and that kind of stuff, vaccines that have been done over the years, we need a body of knowledge to be able to determine, okay, what are some of the factors that affect the efficacy. And then citation bias in that particular case certainly will impact the recommendations that are generated therein. So how do we detect bias? Some of the things that actually we do. Traditionally, I think the most simple approach is just using what we call the funnel plot. A funnel plot is basically a plot of the effect size on the x-axis and the variance up on the y-axis. And in absence of the bias, you have a very nice funnel. On the x-axis here, for example, you have the what we call the effect size. It can be risk ratio, HSD, or coherence D, depending on what you're using in your meta-analysis. On the y-axis, you have the standard error. Of course, remember this is actually from zero, from the highest to the lowest. That's actually been are converted downwards. And most of the time, studies that are that have large sample sizes normally at the top of the funnel, because there's so many, and so the standard error in those studies normally tend to be very small. And then most of the studies that have a small sample size, normally tend to be at the bottom. So you have a nice type of funnel that actually is generated when you have no bias. But when you have bias, some results from just one of my recent papers on meta-analysis, you find that some data points are actually outside the funnel itself, out of the funnel itself. For example, the ones here. This is a very good indication of the fact that you have some bias in your studies. And then, of course, this can be tested, using statistics, using error regression to be able to determine whether the bias is actually significant. But what's more important is that often it's actually very difficult to identify the type of bias you're dealing with. Whether it's publication bias, familiarity bias, cost bias, it's very, very difficult to do that using these particular tests. And you have to do simulation studies to be able to identify the source of bias that is actually affecting the work that you're actually looking at. All right, so I'm just going to give an example, in terms of regionality, in terms of biasness, publication bias, citation bias. I'm just going to give an example. This is work that was done by May in 1997, which was published in Science, where they actually looked at the share of papers published, around the world, and they looked at the citation, frequency of those papers and determine a rank, the rank of those publications. And then they look at the GDP. The whole point here they were actually doing this was actually to relate, look at how the country's GDP influences the publication, and the quality of the publication. And it turns out here, for example, the RCI here is basically a rank. It's an indication of the quality of the publication. On average, it's a measure of the quality of the paper. A value that is 1 and above means that the quality is above average, and a value that is less than 1 indicates that the paper is below average. So from this particular study, they found out that top 15 countries accounted for about 81% of all the publications that were published during that particular time. And the top 7 countries were the G7 countries, of course, related to the GDP, which is not very surprising. But if you look at the relative citation index, which is an indicator of the quality of the papers, they're very similar for the G7 countries. However, there are some countries that had less than 1, a value of less than 1, particularly for France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. So what this particular study showed that the allocation of resources somehow contributed to the proportion of the papers that are being cited. And of course, that also introduces bias because of availability of resources and that kind of stuff, just like I said in my previous slide. So this is an example of where bias can actually come in when you're actually looking at scientific publication. following this particular study, there was a group in Italy that were very concerned, about their low quality value, because the RC value, which is an indicator of the quality of the paper, was less than 1. So they were a little bit curious, and they wondered whether there was some citation bias that's contributed to their low value of ranking based on the study conducted by May 1997. So they actually went back and sort of looked at the publication by Italian scientists that were published in about 206 journals. They conducted a meta-analysis, and then they actually classified these papers, based on the impact factors and the numbers of papers published and the proportion of the papers that were undercited. And they performed a very simple analysis to be able to determine whether the number of papers that are being published were any different from the ones that are actually expected if there was no bias at all. So when they did that, they were able to determine there was some bias, where they found the number of citations per article was significantly higher than the expected citation rate, which indicated that there was the work that was published by May in 1997 in Science, there was some biasness in the values that contributed to the low citation index for Italian papers. And so here, therefore, is okay. So how do we look at this, in terms of bias? How do we go about understanding this, and how, particularly for some of us that are trying to do publish papers and avoid these kind of issues, what are some of the factors that can actually lead to this citation bias? Well, citation bias is a little bit much more complicated than we might think. It's highly more subjective, and also it's actually related to the career and funding sources. For example, if a young professor or a young scientist, and you have a mentor, to be able to be sort of get footing in that particular field, you tend to sort of cite their papers more often than papers of other people, because they're going to read and then give you a good record. So there's subjectivity in what how people cite papers in science, and that can be related to their career as well as their funding sources. But the fact that we have about 49% of the database in English also introduce some bias, because most of the papers that are likely to be cited would be in English. But it's important to realize that despite this, these difficulties in actually establishing the bias, and so systematic studies need to be done to be able to identify, okay, how do we go about identifying the bias, and what does this really mean in terms of science? So this is going to be my last slide. So this is a paper that I came across that was actually looked at citation bias, for example, and how do you go about doing this and identifying factors, that actually contribute to this particular bias. So this was done a meta-analysis, basically consolidated a number of papers, 111,000 papers, synthesized them and looked at what we call, potential factors that actually could explain the underlying bias. And what's actually much more important, is that the fact that they're able to realize that positive articles were cited 2 times as high as a negative one. That's very, very eye-opening, because this is a very good synthesis just to really show why citation bias actually come in. And when a paper is highly significant in terms of the outcome, that's 2 times. And the ones that are negative ones are not likely to be published. So that was something that came out of that particular study. And then they also noticed that the author's conclusions, when you look at the citation, was actually based on the author's conclusions that were drawn by the authors writing the paper, rather than the underlying data that was actually in those particular papers. Often when you read a paper, we hurry, we just probably read the abstract and we read what the authors say, but we don't have time to look at what the data that has been published, to sort of back up what the conclusions that are being drawn. So I'm just encouraging, all of us, for example, when you are citing a paper, make sure you look at the data itself, rather than just necessarily the conclusion of the authors. And so it's very, very important to do that to avoid, biasing citation that you actually include in your publication. Just to summarize, here is just to show that, citation bias actually exists throughout the sciences. It's actually much more prominent in medical sciences than in the life sciences. And as such, therefore, that relevant literature is actually not presented very well in scientific literature. it can be a little bit difficult to synthesize. So far, I've just seen only the paper that was published by Bram in clinical epidemiology that actually done a very good synthesis of what's out there in terms of citation bias. And as I've said, the reason why this is important is because bias can lead to false beliefs and research waste. For example, if you do a meta-analysis and this was the citation bias, and you're only including studies that are actually positive. So when you look at the overall recommendation, they tell you, okay, this fungicide works or this vaccine works, but the sample from which that is actually drawn was already biased. And so, and then people asking, okay, when they take the vaccine or they use the fungicide, it's still not effective. So why is this happening? And then people go back on the drawing board, not knowing that there was some bias originally in what was actually utilized to be able to generate those recommendations. So it's very important to note that. And also, we just need to clarify the rigor of literature search, particularly as the authors, when you're citing people's work, make sure you read, look at the underlying data and cite paper relevantly based on what actually was done rather than the author's own conclusion. And there's some journals now that are coming up to avoid this kind of biasness, to include a statement of how representative the literature is, to make sure that the authors actually saw the data rather than just relying on the conclusions that are actually in the paper that was, the paper that actually they're using to cite in their work. So overall, there's a lot to be done. But I hope this was useful. And with that, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your presentations, very clear and precise and evidence-based with the calculations that you have done and graphs drawn. So I have two questions for you. The first one is, from one of the slides that you presented of the list from countries that have published, Africa, there's no African country in that list.
Yeah.
So isn't that the bias that we are talking about? And how can Africa come out of this? Is it because of the old age equipment that we use in our research? And then the second question is, could you tell us if there are any predatory books? So those are the two questions I have for you.
Okay, so the first question about that list that I presented, I think that list was presented by May, that was published in Science. The original idea for that particular paper was actually to try and relate the country's GDP to their impact in terms of science. And so that was it was more of an economic study to relate how productive a country was to how much resources are being allocated to science and the papers that are being published in that particular country and cited from that particular country. Africa is not on that list because that was the data that was actually presented. And of course, our hope and goal is that, this was done in 1997. It's way back, several years ago. But I've not seen, I did not see a more recent, paper or report to that effect. I'm sure there has been a lot of progress since that particular time. And there have been published papers from science in Africa, of course. And I'm sure when somebody does a similar studies, we're going to be on the list. We might not necessarily be on the high impact or whatever it is in terms of GDP and that kind of stuff, but I'm sure in terms of science, that information is going to be there. And so I think that's all I'm going to say, because that was an economic study. And so as far as predatory books, I think there are books out there. As Patrick and Sarah talked about, some of these books are maybe sort of repeating what other people have said in terms of the content, in terms of the relevance of it. So they tend to mirror traditional books. Like I would say, for example, in plant pathology, we have epidemiology, for example, a classical book by Campbell and Marden, for example, that I've been reading for so many years. When similar books come out that are predatory, they tend to, if the authors or the publishers did not really fact check the book and make sure there's no plagiarism and that kind of stuff, then that's the mistake of the publishers. But most of the time you can actually tell that they pick whole paragraphs or whole chapters, turn things around and publish those. And so I'm sure, I'm not aware about a list of predator books, but I'm probably, they are more likely to be there out there on the web or out there in the field, I think. Yeah. And whether the way you can identify them is still just the way you identify a paper. I'll just read the content and see, and you'll be so surprised, that this is very similar to what I've read in a particular book maybe 5 years ago, or that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Patrick, Peter, and Sarah, for your time and for the good presentations, and even for the time to be here with us. And now over to Michelle.
Thank you, Prof. After all these good words and a lot of advice and strategy for looking for funding, to do our research, and then to ensure that our research can also be published. I hope that you really have learned a lot. Probably there are things that you knew before you came today, and there are definitely many other things that will come to you as part of your participation in this webinar today. We really intend to continue having such topics to keep you engaged in the work that you're doing, and also to kind of get this momentum of you ensuring that your research is having an impact to be there during your time in the fellowship and even after. So I want to thank all the panelists who have been with us today, accepting our invitation and sharing their experiences. I want to thank the whole award team who have supported the preparations and ensuring that everything is going on well today. And you too, all the participants, for your participation. And we want to do more of this, as I said before. So please tell us what you think about this webinar. What kind of topics you will want us to work on in the next webinar that we'll be organizing. Kenneth and Tim will be sharing a short survey. And we really hope that you can give us some good feedback for us to improve on what has not worked very well, but also to tell us what has worked well. Thank you so much, and I wish all of you a happy afternoon, happy evening for those who are in Nairobi, like me, and those who are waking up or just in the middle of their day. Bye all.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Sheila. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Michelle.
Patrick.
Sheila.
That was great.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.